To which most people who know me reply, half of what? And that is the problem. My wife is talking about retiring, and I've committed to trying to do a little more traveling with her and such. And yeah, it's hard. And part of it is that I really do like working with lakes and people. The bad story or the dirty secret is that when I got into this line, it was because I could play with algae and bugs and figured I wouldn't have to deal with people. I found out pretty quickly that's not what lake management is about, and you'll see that in this talk. I'm going to try to accomplish two things. The first one I think everybody will grasp pretty readily, which is that I'm going to give you a framework for considering lake management. I don't know that anybody's done that with you before, and if they have, great. Hearing it again will be good. This is sort of my take on it. But it's the things you need to think about when you're trying to manage a lake, because it's not all just numbers. And then I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about Great Pond, which I've completed the data analysis on it. Actually, I've completed East Pond now as well, but that's not in here. So I'm going to pull this in. It's harder to hit a moving target, so I'm going to walk around a bit. Okay. Lake management is like, for most of you that had a career in something or are still at it, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. Okay, it should start with a clear statement of goals and priorities. I know you folks have goals. I'm not sure that the priorities are clear. The best fishing lake is not the best swimming lake. You can certainly blend the two and have great situations, but the clearer that lake, the lower the fertility, the less fish it produces. Now, for people like me who are quite happy catching fewer fish, maybe by ability, maybe by the type of lake I pick, but enjoying the experience, that's fine. But if you're in that early stage where you just want to catch fish, you know, the cleanest lake is not where you want to go. So you have to think through your priorities. What is it that you want first and foremost? It's pretty easy when you say, well, we don't want invasive species in our lake. Yeah, no problem there. We're all on the same page. But what should the clarity be? How much algae should there be? Where should it be? What should the oxygen level be? These are the things you have to think about. It is way more complicated. For my epitaph, I wanted to simply read, everything is more complicated than you think. If you think something is simple, you've failed to pay attention to the details. Because that just absolutely epitomizes everything I've been doing in my life. You do want to involve action in the watershed. I sometimes get a bad rap, and I don't know anybody here would have necessarily heard it, is, oh, Ken Wagner doesn't really believe in watershed management. Not true at all. Watershed management is what prevents problems in your lake. Watershed management is like doing everything you should do. Eat right, drink in moderation, get exercise, get enough sleep, stay away from people who are sick to prevent a disease. But as you well know, you can't prevent everything. You have to be prepared to deal with the disease. Telling somebody who gets sick, well, you should have protected yourself, isn't going to help them. You've got to have the medicine, the surgery, the whatever else. I deal a lot in that aspect of lake management. I do watershed management as well, but there's lots of people that do that and do it well, and you folks already do that well. It's the in-lake side that lags, and unfortunately this has permeated government from the highest levels down, that they think everything can be fixed by working in the watershed, and it cannot. I will come back to that. As I mentioned at the beginning, lake management is more people management than resource management. Yeah, the science is important, no question about it. There's lots of other aspects in it. I do still get to play with algae and bugs. But the reality is, people are what make this happen, because that's why we manage the lakes. It's your interest in them that gets this done. Find the right one. Okay, some of you can't read all this, by the way, from back there. It's okay. This has been made available to the association. It can be posted on the website. You can look at this at your leisure and scan every word and look for the mistakes. There's 4 levels of lake management. This is really important to understand. First is prevention. That's where we all want to be. Second is rapid response. That's where you're at with your invasive species control and the variable milfoil. Really important pieces, absolutely number 1 and 2 when you say, what do I want to do with this lake? But again, just like the disease analogy, it's not reality. You still get sick once in a while. You still need medical attention. So now you're into either maintenance of the desired condition, same way as you mow your lawn or weed your garden or paint your house or whatever else. There's maintenance that's needed. Or you have to do rehabilitation. So people call it restoration, but sometimes we're trying to make a lake do something it never really did, so we just call it rehabilitation. That covers all of it. Or sometimes you can never get back to where you were. So we rehabilitate lakes to try to make them what we want them to be. Hopefully that matches with what they're able to be. But that isn't always the case. If you look at your lakes, all the Belgrade lakes, they're not created equal. Some are shallower, some are deeper, some are upstream, some are downstream. There's a whole lot going on there. They're not equal. I know we're so big in our society, oh, we want equality. It's not real when it comes to lake management, many other things. There's no level playing field here. You know, if you want to live in the furthest reaches upstream, it's very different than living downstream, and there's pluses and minuses to each. So understanding where you're at with any given problem is really important. You are in prevention and early detection rapid response with regard to the milfoil. With regard to your algae problems, you're past both of those. I mean, there's still prevention to be done, but the algae are here. The nutrients are in that water. You can do whatever you want in the watershed. It will not make an internal load, an internal problem go away. There's an issue there. If it's maintenance, where you're just going out and dealing with it on a localized basis, that's one thing. If it's rehabilitation, where you're trying to take care of the whole lake and really put it back the way it was, okay, they're all good things, and they tend to be more expensive. But you have to understand what stage you're at for each one. And I'll come back to that a little bit with the institutional aspects. Okay, this is another really important set of concepts. I'm going to give my talk at the International Lakes Conference on this issue, which is going to blow them away because I'm the guy that gets up and spouts numbers and talks technical stuff all the time. I'm not even going to bring up a number in this talk. It's all about the three-legged stool of lake management: science, economics, and institutions. Or as they put it here, the technical effectiveness. What works? What can you do? The affordability. And then finally, acceptability on a social scale. Now that's everything from you guys as a lake association, through the state, who has to give you permits, through the federal government, which often supplies a lot of the money, the Section 319 grants, things like that. So these three legs are all critical to lake management. Just like the three-legged stool, it's not going to stand up if each leg isn't solid. The problem is, although there's always more to learn on the technical side, we don't know it all. We know a lot. We kind of have a pretty good feel for what you can and can't do and how it works. There's details that are sorted out, but there's not a whole lot new under the sun in terms of what we can actually do. In terms of affordability, everybody gets that. I mean, folks live on the lake, you have careers, you have families, you understand budgets. I can tell you what it costs. You can tell me if you can afford it. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. Now, yeah, somebody's always looking for that pie-in-the-sky, dirt-cheap solution that fixes everything. And you know full well that most of you are as old as I am or older. Well, you get what you pay for. And it's just, there's no substitute. But the economics, everybody gets. It's the institutional side where we most often fall down. Now, you have a really solid lake association. You've got a lot of people out here, but you will know there's a lot more people who aren't here. And you all have neighbors or friends who just don't really care. They want to come up to the lake and hang out and have it be beautiful, and they really don't want to get involved. And it's hard to sell. It's hard to sell prevention. It's when things are good. How do you get people out to make them keep it good? It'll always be this way. No, it won't. Even if you weren't here on the earth, this lake is gradually going to get more fertile and die. All of them will. That's a natural progression. It should take thousands of years, not decades or a couple hundred, which unfortunately is what happens when people get involved in many cases. But it's going to happen. It's unidirectional. Lakes don't get cleaner by themselves. They get dirtier. It's just a natural function of what goes on. There are rare exceptions, but they are rare. So we have to stay on top of this. So having institutions that push for this is really important. And as a lake association, and again, they didn't put me up to this. Your donations, your time, your interest is critical. It's what makes this happen. Because as sad as it is, further up the ladder, they're not going to help you. You might get some money out of it, but think about it. You have a Department of Environmental Protection. There are some outstanding people there. What is their job? Is it to make your lake clean? They're here to protect the environment, your property value, your recreational enjoyment, your safety. It's not in their list. It's not their job. They're here to make sure the environment is protected. That may mean that when you want to do Action X, if it might affect the very rare zinger, zanger, pucker sucker, you'd say, sorry, can't do that. But it won't get rid of our milfoil. Yeah, that'd be nice, but sorry, you can't affect the zinger, zanger, pucker sucker. That's my job. And I get this all the time. Now, Maine is better than most, and if you come in with an invasive species, they're going to be all over it. They're really good about jumping on problem species. They get it. A lot of states don't. Further south you go, the worse it gets, the more invasive species they have. But when it comes to something like algae or water quality, they monitor wonderfully. But what do they do with all those data? What was it, 40 years worth, Whitney, you guys wound up evaluating? Nobody looked at it in decades. It's not their job. Now, I wish it was, and I can tell you the good people also wish it was their job. But it's not, and they don't control it. That's your government further up. I realize a lot of you can't even vote here. That's how it works sometimes. But it's below my pay grade. I can't tell you how to deal with the politicians. I hate that part. The bottom line is, there are issues with this lake that will not be solved. Certainly by the federal government, probably not by the state government. You can drag them along kicking and screaming. You can get their financial support. Sometimes you can get them to enact legislation to help you when it's happened, but it's going to come from you. This is the institution that matters the most. And you've got the BRCA, you've got other groups around the state that are doing things like this. That's where you really need to focus your attention. Absolutely talk to your representatives, talk to people at the state level, get the DEP people involved, because you've got some really good ones in the state. I've known them for 30, 40 years. But it's not their job to fix your lake. Just priority-wise, Great Pond, although you know you have issues, is a pretty darn nice lake compared to things. It's not going to be at the top of their list for things they want to run in and do something about. So you want something done, you got to do it. And you've got the organization to make it happen. So those three legs are critical. But I'll tell you now, the institution is the weakest leg, and it's the one you got to work the hardest on. Okay, institutional myth busting. Hopefully, for those of you who can actually read it from where you're at, won't say, oh yeah, I believe that. But you know, it's remarkable. People behave differently than what they say. All lake problems can be fixed with watershed management. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not true. I can tell you I can find that written in federal stuff. I saw it creep into the East Pond TMDL from a few years back. There's a statement in there, I'm paraphrasing a little, that basically says, because of the loading in East Pond, we need to step up our watershed management effort so that the internal loading will be reduced. Wait a minute. How is that even related? You know, it's saying I'm going to put my finger in the dike after I'm already waist deep in water and that water's going to go away. I'm going to go out to my boat and I'm going to put the cover on after the big rainstorm and that will make my boat dry up. No, it's just dead wrong. Once you have this internal recycling, this is getting the disease. No amount of prevention is going to make it go away. It may make it not get worse. It may keep you protected when and if you get better. And again, please don't consider, there's Ken Wagner again saying we don't need watershed management. Not true. You absolutely have to manage water, but that's your prevention. That's your protection of your investment in the lake. But you've got to do things in the lake if you want to go. I mean, how would we get rid of the milfoil if you weren't in the lake? What could you do in the watershed to get rid of that? I don't know. It doesn't work that way. Yet these people will sit there and tell you that with a straight face. It's real hard to take. Invasive species eradication is really not possible. It's just not worthwhile because there's corollary impacts. Well, you see that a little bit. When you have an endangered species, you can't go in and do the same things you would do otherwise. There are laws that protect endangered species. There's no law that says you must get rid of an invasive species. That's a problem. I understand why it is. I'm not necessarily advocating for a law that says we have to get rid of invasive species, but I would appreciate if the people running the endangered species program would be a little more considerate and work with us instead of saying, not my job, not my problem. And we do run into that. Now you're back to the institutional side. Letting nature take its course is the best approach. Some of you have no doubt been to Nantucket. I do some work out there. Classic story, meeting with one of their lead environmental officials. I said, so what's your policy on lake management out here? He goes, well, we kind of like to let nature take its course. Which if you've seen their ponds, you know they were living that. And I said, really? He said, so if there was a lightning strike in historic downtown, would you put out the fire? Well, of course we would. I said, if you had a big storm tide coming in, would you put the sandbags up? Well, yeah. I said, how's that letting nature take its course? He goes, guess I never thought about it that way. It's a mindset that's just mind-boggling to me. But it's not right. Now, if conditions are desirable, they'll stay desirable. This is also untrue. I've already told you, lakes tend to be unidirectionally. They get more and more fertile. People like to say they die. I don't like that analogy. It's more like they get fat. These are just like us. Yeah, they get older, they don't exercise as much, we enjoy our food, and they get fat. Actually, they're teeming with life, just not the life we want. Now they start losing oxygen, they're going to die. But you definitely we have issues with things do not stay the same. And I'll give you the classic case in point. This goes to institutional things as well. Working on a lake on Cape Cod, there was a pretty serious layer of algae down deep, and it was suggested they do an aluminum treatment, something we're contemplating in some of your lakes here, to inactivate the phosphorus so that we would have less fertility. Because the lake hosted endangered mussels, we were told, not terribly politely, by the endangered species folks, sorry, you can't do that because we think the aluminum will harm the endangered mussels. We said, no, it really won't. We've done this in other places. Well, we think it will. Well, we think you're wrong, and you've got algae that could really be a problem here. Well, we think you're wrong, and we have the law on our side, so you're not doing it. The very next year, and I wish I'd had a bet on this, the very next year the algal bloom hit the surface, 95+% of the mussels died, including almost all of the endangered species. So can I have a permit now? Yeah. Well, how long is it going to take? The guy looks at his watch instead of the calendar. Tragic, absolutely tragic. And the saddest part is, had I gone and done the treatment, I'd be in jail or fined. The fact that they denied the treatment and all this stuff died, what happened to them? Nothing at all. In fact, I don't even think they learned from it, which is frustrating. But the point is, things don't stay the same. You have to go in and manage. You need the monitoring and the data to show you where things are going, and you need to make the concerted effort, sometimes a preemptive strike, before problems happen. It's hard to sell prevention. It's hard to sell that preemptive strike. I realize that. And you don't want to act without good knowledge. You don't want to say, well, they did it at this lake, it ought to work for us. That's not good either. But it's really important to understand where you're going and the consequences of not acting, because no action is still a choice of an action, and it can be disastrous consequences. When in doubt, do nothing to avoid problems. Well, I just told you that. Doing nothing is not the same thing as avoiding harm. And that case on Cape Cod is a classic example. And the last is, the internet is a reliable source of information. I tell all my clients this: if you want me to spend time debunking things you read on the internet, I'm charging you double for every second. It's so frustrating. And it happens all the time. And some very wealthy, and I've had doctors, lawyers, financiers, captains of industries, heads of hospitals. Well, I read on the internet that. Wouldn't this work for us? And it's a fair question. But he said, did you read the follow-up information? Did you check this? Did you cross-reference? Where'd you get it from? I heard herbicides were terrible. Where'd you get it from? People against herbicides. I see. Well, I heard this thing will work fantastic. Where'd you get it? From the vendor's website. You wouldn't do that in your own career. I mean, those are your stockbrokers. Would you like some hot stock tips from a limnologist? No. This is the problem. We just buy the stuff from the client. And yet again, no individual really says they do it, but I'm telling you, people all the time, hey, I saw this on the internet. Yeah, I'm sure you did. There's a thing out about a particular chemical that was a very negative report, and I've had people say, well, there's anything that's horrible. And I always ask, for a show of hands, how many of you actually read the report? So far as I can tell, I am the only person on the face of the earth that actually read the report. They all just got a snippet off the internet and said, there's the answer. Watch it. Do not. Internet is a fantastic source of information. It's just not a reliable source. So you have to be careful. Okay, one last one. Management inertia. Trying to move past the, gee, we should do this. This works with lake associations. This works with the state, even the federal government, anybody involved in management of any kind, not just lakes. And this comes from my now 4-year-old, then 2.5-year-old granddaughter, Abigail. And when this happened, everybody is howling and laughing. I'm sitting there like stone faces. What's the matter? Is it, I just learned something. She likes to play restaurant. She gets up in this play apparatus. It's eye level with us, and she will make whatever you want. So her dad, standing behind her there, says, Abigail, I'd like a burger with bacon. So she'll make it up, and here you go, Daddy. I went up and said, Abigail, I'd like a bowl of fried worms. Now, she's 4 now, and she says, no, yucky, yucky, Papa. But back then, she knew what fried worms were. She knew what frying were. Yeah, here's your fried worms, Papa. Now, who goes to a restaurant and orders fried worms? But to a 2.5-year-old, that's what she knows? Yeah, okay. But the troublemaker, my older son, Jeff, goes up, Abigail, I would like iced vichyssoise and filet mignon. She says, we don't have that, Jeff. Says, well, Abigail, it's just make-believe. She says, I know, but we still don't have that, Jeff. So that's when little kid certainty meets big person sniders. The point is, and this is what hit me, she doesn't know what it is. She doesn't understand it. You can't have it because she doesn't know what it is. So when I go in and say, I want to do this aluminum treatment to the endangered species folks who have no knowledge of this, the first thing you do is get a snippet off the internet. Oh, aluminum could cause Alzheimer's. Well, no, that's been discredited for 25 years, but you can still find that somewhere. Aluminum could possibly kill mussels. In a toxic state, it does kill organisms. Well, there it is. Well, wait a minute now. We've been doing this stuff for 20 years. The last time a fish ever died in any aluminum treatment I was related to was year 2000. That's 16 years of treatments where we learned what to do. So, why? But they won't listen. We even had experts write letters to them, a mussel expert saying, this is no problem, you should do this. And they just put it in the file and said, thank you very much, no. So this is the problem. It's very hard to get a group to do something when they don't understand what it is. And that's fair. Now, when it's somebody you're paying their salary, like a state employee, you should understand this stuff, that you got reason to be outraged. When it's people in a lake association who just read the paper, see something, well, explain this to us. Why should we do this? Why will this work? That's fair. No problem with that. And I don't mind going educating, agency folks as well. It's just that there's this immediate resistance, and what it comes down to is if you're in a permitting agency, and I've said it before, you're not responsible for managing it. You're responsible for preventing harm. Doing nothing equates to preventing harm to many of these people. It's not true, but it is the reality. So you've got to educate. There's a constant education function. It needs to be done for the Lake Association. It has to be done by the Lake Association. You've got to get your neighbors, everybody who's involved with this lake up to speed to understand. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go get a PhD in lake management, but at least grasp the essentials, grasp the framework, understand where you're at, and then think about what are my options. Okay, so let's move to the actual Belgrade Lakes. Nice shot. You see the matrix of them, some really nice lakes, quite a range of them, but they're not all created equal. Next slide's probably better. East Pond goes through the Serpentine Stream to North Pond, that goes to Great Pond, that goes to Long Pond, that goes to Messalonsky Lake. So why should anybody at Messalonsky care what goes on up at East Pond? Darn well ought to, because what's there is coming to you. What you've got in Great Pond or Long Pond in the way of invasive species, where do you think that's going? Everything's connected. Everything is interlinked. Everything doesn't depend on everything else. Some things it only goes one way. But you really can't separate it out. We tend to think of the watershed as the unit of management, and it's a good concept. Because what happens in that watershed, because then you think about airshed, groundwater sheds, it gets bigger than that. People driving in from somewhere else with a boat. I mean, there's more to it. But at least at the minimum, think in terms of everything that's upstream of you. And then hopefully you can have the Native American viewpoint of, things for 7 generations, or dealing with the people downstream, because I shouldn't be hurting them either. Okay. Diagram that will hopefully help sort things out in terms of when numbers start getting thrown around, that there are like 6 different input sources for lakes. The atmosphere, what falls out of the sky. Now, I'd like to say we don't have much control there, but the reality is we do. We had Clean Air Act of 1990 did an amazing job making our air cleaner. It's not perfect, but tremendous. Remember acid precipitation? Not really discussed all that much anymore because of that law. So we can make some difference, but okay, you can't actually build a dome over all this and keep the stuff from falling. Discharges, not many around here, but there are places, sewage treatment plants, that has to go somewhere, and they may be discharged into a stream or a lake. Wildlife, we don't want to get rid of the things. I see you got the loon there. I don't know if you get that for being loony or it's just a nice thing. I love loons. And, loons, geese, gulls, ducks, all of them. Stuff goes in one end as food, it comes out the other end and winds up in the lake often. It's an input. It's usually not a big deal, and I don't go around except some park lakes where there's thousands and thousands of geese doing much about it because we find those to be a valuable part of our lake experience. But they do put things into the water, just like people do. Groundwater. Often underrated and understudied, and there's not a lot on that up here either. I mean, you guys mostly have septic systems. Things go in there. It does get treated pretty well, but the stuff goes through the soil, eventually gets to the lake. That may be the source of some of your metaphyton problems, the algae around the edge. That's groundwater comes in all the time. And in a dry year like this, the groundwater is even more important. And then the last two on there, the watershed runoff and the internal recycling. Those are usually the biggies. Not always. There's no standard, oh, this has to be one and this has to be two. It could be any order here. Watershed runoff, it's what happens when it rains. I mean, there's dry weather flows as well, but you probably all notice a lot of your little streams are dry right now, and it's when it rains, the water flows. That carries with it stuff that runs off the land. Some of the stuff that landed from the air and sat on the ground and it gets washed off. If it's impervious surface, roofs, sidewalks, roads, even a lot of lawns, and it rains hard enough, that stuff winds up in the nearest storm drain system or the nearest stream and then winds up in the lake. It's an issue. It's usually not a big issue at any instant in time because your lakes are pretty big and your watersheds aren't all that big and it's just a little bit, so it's incremental. But over years, decades, this stuff builds up and then it can internally recycle, and that's the last one. There's a bunch of ways things recycle. I'll cover that briefly, but the bottom line is just because it's gone, it isn't forgotten. It ran into the lake, maybe it got used, maybe it didn't by algae, it drops on the bottom. That's not the end of it. It can be recycled and come back to haunt you. And over time, most of you know there's more sediment in that lake than there was before. Sometimes it's right around your dock. Sometimes you have to go out deeper. That stuff accumulates. That's the whole point of this one-way system where lakes gradually fill in. Should take eons. But that stuff, as it's sitting there, interacts with the water over top of it and can become a source of nutrients. All right, for Great Pond, don't worry about the numbers per se. Just look at the pie slices. The point is, in general, most of the water coming in is either direct drainage or direct precipitation. After that, you get a good chunk from North Pond. The others are much smaller. And of course, there's nothing coming in from waterfowl or internal release. We're not really measuring those as quantities of water. But that's the water budget. That's where it all comes from. The phosphorus budget, and nobody's told you this before, and imagine, phosphorus is that key nutrient we really worry about. Nitrogen, iron, lots of other things are important. But if you don't have phosphorus, you're not going to have algae. So we try to minimize that one. That's the most important one. The phosphorus load splits up very differently. And again, there's a fair amount of slush moving back and forth here. It's not, don't believe the decimal points or anything, but as a general rule, on average, take 10 years of data and put it together. The biggest load is actually internal that comes out of that water. Now, a lot of it cycles and goes right back in the sediment. It takes a bad year to reach a point where it really makes a difference in the lake. And you've had bad years, and lately you've had good years. That's weather dependent. So right away, we've got a total, outlier thrown in here, and then an outlier, a wild card. In that, tell me what the weather's going to be like. I'll tell you what your lake's going to be like. We don't know. We can't predict that well. After that, and pretty much tied with it, are all the three main tributaries coming in. The three streams, the direct drainage and North Pond and Salmon Lake, really else over there, but those all add up to about the same, 1,200 kilograms a year. After that, the atmospheric input is not insignificant. Now, I can tell you when you look at this doesn't mean much in terms of the number. Let's say tell you you're at about 3,500 kilograms per year. Where you would like to be to make sure your lake is always clean is about 2,600 per year. So you are over where you'd like to be. It's not horrible. I've seen way worse, but it's not good. And it's going the wrong way, mostly because that internal load gets bigger and bigger. All right, a lot of words people probably can't read back there. This can be looked at online. Point is, at about 7 micrograms per liter, that's the low end of the current range. That's what you experienced last year, which was a pretty good year out here. You would expect your second disc to be at least 5.5, 6 meters. That's pushing 20 feet. You may have done even better. And you have minimal blooms. There shouldn't be a lot of serious algae. You might have some metaphyton, but you shouldn't have a lot of algae blooms. If you go the other way, where you're approaching 17 micrograms per liter, and that's as high as any model suggests you could get with the load you have. And the reality is, the closest I've seen is a couple years with around 13 micrograms per liter. And anything over 10 is getting bad. Anything over 20 is outrageous. So it's a pretty narrow range. But there you would be getting, your clarity would be less than 10 feet. You're going to notice that. You're going to notice that big time. And you're going to have blooms about 12% of the time, pretty much during the summer. And a bloom I'm defining as chlorophyll, which is the algal pigment of more than 10 micrograms per liter. Don't worry about what that is. If you would see that in the water, you would notice it. And you've seen it. It has happened out here. To maximize the probability of no blooms, and keep in mind, almost everything in life is a probability distribution. I don't want me to make statisticians out of everybody, but so little in your life is a toss of the coin. Almost all of you drove here today, right? You know that you could have been in a car accident and killed. That was an absolute finite probability, but it was so small that it was worth coming to this meeting. I hope it was worthwhile. But this is the thing. There's risks to everything. So it's not a matter of the lake is good or the lake is bad. It's a probability distribution. Well, if we want to shift that probability to the lowest possible thing, that we're just not going to see chlorophyll higher than 10 micrograms per liter, we need to be under about 2,650 kilograms per year. Now, does that mean 2,649 is great and 2,651 is terrible? No. It's just a matter of that's the direction we want to move, which is like 900, 850 kilograms less than where we're at right now. The only place you can get that kind of reduction, 850 kilograms, is either from the three main tributaries collectively, well, direct drainage and the other two tributaries, which are really just connectors to lakes, or from the internal load. Well, you've been working in the direct drainage in those other lakes for more than a decade, trying to make things better, and you have. But the bottom line is, how much more do you think you can squeeze out of that? 10%, 20%? Let's say you can do 50%, which is as good as anybody ever does with watershed management. Well, if they're at 1,200 now, and you cut them down by another 50%, that's still only a reduction of 600. You're not getting there. You have to do something in the lake. You don't have to do it now. You don't have to do it all. But you're going to have to do something about that 1,200 kilograms on average that's coming out of the lake. This year, I hope so far, and last year for sure, it wasn't that big. It never got to be that much. The oxygen was better. It did eventually run out, but conditions weren't that bad. It's weather dependent. But you get a really bad year, it's coming out, and it's going to be bad. Whitney and I have both been asked, well, what do you predict going forward? You're going to have another bad bloom within 10 years, maybe more than one. It's going to happen, because you're going to have another weather year that just feeds into it. The lake isn't going to suddenly become East Pond. Great Pond isn't going to become East Pond in the next decade. But it's going to move in that direction. So you have to decide, when do we act? That's an institutional question. I can help you with the science and the affordability. I can answer for you what your tolerance is. The caveats on this, don't equate a model with reality. There's a lot of modeling going on here. There's a lot of simplification. And again, don't look for yes or no answers to questions of gradient. Okay, internal sources of phosphorus. I've mentioned this several times. There's really three modes. One is phosphorus that's bound to iron, and when the oxygen is lost, the iron often releases the phosphorus back into the water column. That's the one we're most worried about. It's also possible that you have phosphorus bound to organic matter, and that organic matter will decay and release the phosphorus. That's a pretty slow process. That's a big deal in really shallow lakes. I'm not sure that isn't important in East Lake or East Pond, but it doesn't seem to be a big deal in Great Pond. And the last one is we call biological transfer. Fish and invertebrates move sediment around and recycle things. But the one we worry about the most are certain types of algae, particularly Gliotrichia, a name that I think you've heard in association with Great Pond before, which grows on the bottom, sucks up nutrients at the sediment-water interface, and then pops up to the surface with a bunch of air vacuoles it creates in the cells, already loaded. This is an alga that packs a picnic lunch and goes up to the hilltop, where it can grow more, and it's insidious, and it's a tremendous evolutionary adaptation, but they're getting their nutrients at the bottom, coming to the top, getting the light, and growing into a worse bloom. And that's the issue that we have. So there's a real issue here in terms of this biological transfer being a harbinger of upcoming problems in the water column itself. When you start getting those blooms, you know where you're going. We've got a crowd here.
Can we interrupt you?
You may.
So we have some young future stewards who have some...
There may still be some phosphorus being released, but for the most part, it minimizes it. Well, when you look at what happens, the right one here. This is what it looks like in the spring And there's the bottom, there's the top. As you move through the summer, first off, the water gets warmer and you get less oxygen because warmer water holds less oxygen. But these numbers are still pretty good. It gets less and less and less at the bottom, so you get out here to the end of the summer and you've got a big chunk of your lake that has no oxygen in it. That is a serious problem. We've been very fortunate in Great Pond that it hardly ever happens in early August. It rarely happens by the end of August, and it usually happens sometime in September when everybody's pretty much ready to go home, and you get some turnover and it all drops back out again. So we've been very fortunate, but that won't happen all the time. It's getting worse. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not yours, but at some point it's going to get anoxic sooner, and you're going to have more internal recycling and more algal blooms. That's where it's heading. Different way to look at this, well, okay, 1990 and earlier, the red zone is where it was anoxic. 2015, by the end of summer, the red zone is where it was anoxic, and that is a huge difference. Less than 10% versus about 40% of the lake. That is the whole difference between low internal recycling and high internal recycling, the loading. So that's what's going on here. Whitney's going to talk more about that. But this is the kind of diagram I think will help you get it. Way back, you always had a little anoxia, maybe not always, but in our lifetimes, some anoxia near the bottom. But now by the end of the summer, and sometimes earlier, it's all the way up to the thermocline. That's the boundary level between the upper and lower water level. The problem is when it's down here, even though what gets produced in this water is not good stuff, it has to run like a 20-foot gauntlet of oxygenated water to get up here where the algae can use it. Doesn't happen. That stuff drops back out, you make out just fine. You can do okay when you have a little bit of anoxia. When it's this much, first off, much more area is affected. It can get to the thermocline where algae have enough light and that can use the nutrients. You also have things that grow in the sediment around here that'll pop up, like the gliotrichia. So this is what's going on. You've gone from this to this. This is not good, but it's not awful. This is awful. And of course, this is just showing what it is at the end of summer. If this was to happen in, say, July, you'd all be looking for new places to live. It would be very bad. All right, the other Belgrade lakes, just a few notes. Each lake needs an analysis. Do not assume that what applies to one applies to the others. The processes apply, but the relative abundance is different. They've got different depth, whether or not they stratify thermally, have an upper and lower water level in the summer makes a huge difference. The oxygen status matters greatly. You can have a deep lake that stratifies, it still has plenty of oxygen. Sebago Lake downstate still has 80% saturation all summer long. It's wonderful. But you don't have that in all these. The internal load's likely to be important in most of your lakes. We're just at that stage. More important in some than others. I think East Pond, it's huge. Great Pond, it's moderate. The position in the overall watershed matters. I think you need to care about all these lakes, but where you are in the watershed does create inequality. The biological structure will matter. I know they made a big effort to biomanipulate East Pond to make it better. It was a sound theory. The practice is a lot harder. But that biological structure makes a difference. If you start losing oxygen at the bottom and you're losing your cold water fish, that changes a whole lot of other things too. So you want to be aware of the biological structure. You have the additional issue of invasive plant species, particularly variable milfoil. That is a definite issue. It superimposes on this. There is some relationship, but it's not a good one. If you want to get rid of the invasive milfoil by means other than your direct activity, then have lots and lots of algal blooms so plants can't grow. That is not a recommendation, but that's a problem. You also have the additional or separate issue, I'm going to call it, of the metaphyton. There's two reasons you have that. It's the powdery pillows of algae that grow in the shallows. There's two reasons for that. One is convective currents that let some of that nutrient-rich water get moved into the edges. The other is wastewater, contaminated groundwater seeping in. Most of the wastewater systems do a really good job removing phosphorus. They don't do a great job removing nitrogen. So what arrives at the lake has a high nitrogen to phosphorus ratio, and that metaphyton loves that. So that may be part of your problem. Oh, and then finally, we have considerable effort by Colby to do a lot of this work, and this is what Whitney got his award for. There's a lot of folks generating these data. Believe me, we need that. I mean, I'm still finding little holes and gaps, and he's quickly plugging them, but there's a lot to be known, a lot to know, particularly if you're going to wind up spending serious money to fix something. All right, last couple things. When you get to the situation you're in, really with all the lakes, but particularly with Great Pond, you have 4 primary choices. The first is still watershed management. I've told you that you can't fix the problem in lake with watershed management, but if you're not preventing the problem, it doesn't work. So the same idea, you've got a serious leak in your boat. You can bail out all you like, the water's going to come right back in and you're where you started from. You have to patch the leak and you have to bail out the boat. Now, we've got government agencies telling us, no, you just have to patch the leak. Well, no, I still got to bail the boat. But you can't just bail the boat. So watershed management is part of all of it. You're already doing a fair amount of that. Dredging is the ideal solution. If money and permits were no object, I would dredge a lot of lakes. Rough rule of thumb, every acre foot is $50,000. You've got 8,000 acres of lake out there, folks. It's an absurd amount of money, if you can even get the permits to do it, because any slight contamination, even stuff that you wouldn't mind eating, the regulations will not let you put that just anywhere, and you wind up with ridiculous costs to get rid of it. So dredging is really only done when you need to reclaim depth. Maybe you have some issues in a few coves, but for the most part, your lakes are plenty deep enough for what you want to do with them. So dredging isn't a realistic thing here. But the other two, phosphorus inactivation and hypolimitic oxidation, those are cocktail party words, I know. But all they're really saying is we're going to lock up the phosphorus so it can't be recirculated into the overlying water, or we're going to make sure there's enough oxygen down there to keep the phosphorus from coming out. Those are your 2 in-lake choices to work with. So I'm not going to go in great detail on this because it's time to move on, but this is stuff that will be on the web so you can consider it. This is the kind of stuff we're working through with your board of directors. If you wanted to inactivate phosphorus, you have to figure out the dose based on the iron-bound phosphorus. Right now, I would say that you're looking at something on the order of 25 grams per square meter you have to put down. If you look at the whole possible 1,900 acres you might treat, you'd be pushing $2 million for a treatment. Now, you should get from that at least 20 years of relief. Not a bad investment, but it's still a lot of money. You may be able to do less. We have to refine this. It's a matter of how much area is really contributing how much. It may be that certain parts of the lake need one dose and other parts need a different dose. There's more to do with this. But this is one option. I have done a lot of these in the last 2 decades. Remarkably successful. I've had lakes that literally had 3-foot visibility or are now 25, 30-foot visibility. And I had only one that I did in 1995 that has now run its course. Indeed, it took 19 years, and then we came right back last year and treated it, and it's even better than it was last time because we knew more about how to do it. So it's a tried and true technique. It is not the answer to all problems in every lake, so don't just jump on it. Yes, we want to do it. But it is a real high probability to be successful in virtually all of the lakes here. And lastly is the hypolimitic oxidation. I love this technique. This is what water suppliers do. They would not do an aluminum treatment because they want the benefits that you get by putting oxygen into the water. It also lowers the iron, the manganese, a lot of other reduced compounds, things you don't want in the water supply. As a recreational person, yeah, you'd like to have some extra oxygen down there for the fish, but you'll get that from the aluminum treatment too. You really prefer the one-shot deal, treat it and be done for 20 years. I get that. But if you were able to do this year in, year out by putting a system in that would inject diffused oxygen and put it in there directly, you could get any portion of that bottom to be oxygenated all the way to the bottom if you want. There we're looking at a capital cost pushing about $1 million, actually a little cheaper possibly than the alum treatment, but then about $60,000 every year to run it, so it catches up pretty quickly. So these are the things to think about. These are the order of magnitude kind of estimates. They're not cheap, but it's all real. The pros and cons, again, are listed out. You know, you get a little better phosphorus inactivation result from that than you do from the oxidation. There's a whole lot of complicated reasons for it. You get some improvement of oxygen from phosphorus inactivation. You get better with the hypolimitic oxidation. They both cost a lot, but there's no operating cost to the phosphorus inactivation. You have an ongoing operating cost for hypolimitic oxidation. Fishing interference, the phosphorus inactivation, if you do it, you're done. It's material on the bottom. It's not a problem. There is a physical network of piping in the lake, and yeah, you catch fishing lines and anchors and stuff on it, so that is a downside. The duration of benefits for the phosphorus inactivation in a deep lake is typically about 20 years, and that's been borne out over and over. A guy wrote a paper last year looking at 114 treatments, and yeah, the answer is 20 years. Indefinite, though, for the hypolytic oxidation, and you'll probably have to do less and less as you go on because things will oxidize and stay that way, but you'll never not be doing it. So it's indefinite, but you're going to do it forever, and that turns some people off. They're both chemicals being put in the lake. This drives me nuts. Well, I don't want to put aluminum in it. It's a chemical. What do you think oxygen is? Well, but oxygen is natural. So's aluminum. Whitney can tell you all about aluminum in the lakes around here. So we're not doing anything that's unnatural. In fact, both of these are used extensively in water and wastewater treatment. If you live anywhere with a public water supply, I guarantee you there's aluminum in your water because that's what they use to clean it up. And they use oxidation in lots of wastewater treatment processes as well. So this is not weird science. This is not dangerous to your health. There's risks in everything, but these things both work really well. Okay, the next steps, we still got to get more data. Unfortunately, it looks like 2016 may not be a whole lot different than 2015, which is good for you guys enjoying the lake, but means we're not seeing the real bad bloom here with our data. We got to think about the management order for the lakes. Do we start with East Pond up top and work our way down? Do we start with Great Pond because of the great interest? Hard to say. That's an institutional question. We do need more sediment testing, some more lab testing for aluminum doses if we want to go that route, some consultation on oxidation needs. There's only a few people that really do this stuff. I plan them, but I'm not a vendor for that, and I want to talk to the guys that would actually do it. Get all the institutions on the same page, that they're all pulling in the same direction. We don't necessarily expect the DEP to come out and say, yeah, that's what you guys got to do, but at least don't get in the way. And then fundraising to implement the actions, because none of this is cheap. Okay, I'll just sum up. There's a lot to know to properly manage a lake. You need to invest in the data, which you have been doing, and I applaud your effort. That's one of the reasons I agreed to come work with this group. You guys seem to be willing to do what needs to be done. Great Pond's definitely getting a phosphorus load that's in excess of what we would like to see. It's not wildly in excess, but it's more than you'd like in the long run. Internal phosphorus loading is a big piece of that. It's the one place we know we can get an immediate and high reduction. It does not mean we want to ignore watershed management. You need to keep up with that, but we need to step it up on the internal load as well. And again, the means of control are available, but they are expensive, so there's a lot to think about. I believe that is it on my slides. Yep. I will stop there.